Hi, everybody. As Adriana said, I am Sydney, and this summer I worked with mainly Dr. Allison Goodwill from University of Colorado in Denver, along with some others because I am part of the CINET as well. And our project focused on observing the capabilities of Ecostress evapotranspiration satellite data. So just a little background on evapotranspiration. To break it down, it is basically just the sum of evaporation and transpiration in an ecosystem. And this is affected by things like temperature or humidity or soil moisture. And it is important in an agricultural landscape because we're able to better understand crop production. And so this is where it kind of fits in with CINET, is because CINET is mainly focused on intensively managed landscapes like agricultural regions. And so Ecostress, which is the big part of this whole project, it stands for Ecosystem Spaceborne Thermal Radiometer Experiment on Space Station. So it's quite the mouthful. So you'll just hear me refer to it as Ecostress throughout all of this. But it is a pretty new. It's an innovative technology. It's a NASA-funded satellite hosted on the International Space Station. It was developed in like the last few years, and so there was a lot of learning to go along with this. There's not too much information out on it yet. But if you look to the right here, you can see a picture of the satellite. This was on the NASA website. Yeah, it's a pretty cool image. And so the project objectives changed a few times just because, like I said, it's such a new technology and just working through some technological errors. But overall, I had 4 main project objectives. And so to break it down, it would be access and download the Ecostress data, and then open and read the satellite data through the coding language of Python, create swath grids of the Champaign, Illinois area, which is where I focused. I'll get into that a little more later. And then by doing all of this, explore the overall capabilities of Ecostress. So to begin accessing and downloading the data, there's a few different ways that you can do this. I personally found it the easiest using NASA's Earth Data Search. I thought it was the most user-friendly, and also we were just kind of going into this blindly and just kind of playing around with things in the beginning. So once I got into this Earth Data Search, you need to download the ET and the GEO files. And so ET files contain the variables like the evapotranspiration rates, combinations of different locations, and specific times and dates. Whereas the GEO files contain geolocation for specific times and areas. And I found out the hard way, it is very important to match up the ET and GEO files for regridding purposes. If you don't do so, you run into the problem of any plots that you make, they're going to look almost identical. So it's pretty important to make sure you get those before going forward with the gridding of the data. And so this is the Earth Data Search. I just wanted to include a snippet because it was a pretty big project of actually getting, or pretty big part of the project getting this data, because as you can see down here, there's over 72,000 granules. And granules is just, I guess, a fancier word for the actual files that you download. And so to break it down and make it much more manageable, they include filters. And so you can, if you know the specific ID for your granule, you can type it in, it brings it up. But for me, like I said, we weren't really going for anything too specific. The biggest thing for this project was looking at like crop seasons. And so I started in April, because that's when they usually start planting, and then ended my filter with mid-October, because here in Champaign, usually things are harvested by the end of October. And so once I did that, it narrows it down a good bit. And then also behind this window right here, there's actually a satellite map, and I created a bounding box around the Champaign-Urbana area. So then that narrowed it down even more and got me down to, I believe it was like 550 granules. And then I just went from there going by year, which made it much easier than looking at thousands and thousands of data sets. So once you download these files, they are in the H5 format for anybody who is curious about that. And I used the Spider software, which I'll show a picture of here in a minute. And I found a Ecostress tutorial through the Jet Propulsion Laboratory website, and it was a pretty extensive tutorial. It walked through a code to extract the data and also create these plots. And so we used that, and then with the help of Dr. Goodwell, we had altered some things to make it fit exactly what we were needing for this project, because it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all. And by doing so, we were able to see the various coordinates, the ET data, dates and times, and from that, able to create the swaths that I was talking about of an area over several pixels, where you can observe the ET fluctuations in the area. So it was really nice being able to visually see that difference. And so this is the Ecostress tutorial code that I mentioned. I really liked using it in Spider because of the way that it lists out these variables here, and also the plots, once you code those, also come up in this area. And so these are all the different variables that come out of the code. There's lots of stuff that goes into it. And so as you can see, it's pretty extensive. And then this is one of the swaths that I created from the altered code that we had made from the tutorial code. And so this is of the Champaign, Illinois area, more specifically the Goose Creek, as Justin talked this morning, if you were here for his presentation. And we do have a flux tower in the area. If you can see this tiny little X here, that marks where the flux tower is. And so it's nice because, like I said, you can visualize the fluctuations of ET across this landscape. And so overall, my analysis of Ecostress, there were 4 big things that really stuck out to me. And one of which was, going into this, we knew that Ecostress was known for its high spatial resolution, but more specifically, it's 38 by 69 meters. And then they do a routine sampling. And so it's 4-day diurnal repeat cycle sampling, meaning that the satellite goes over the area every 4 days and only during the daytime. And as I talked about earlier with the Earth data search, I found it very user-friendly to use once you get in to access the data. And they had on the website, I believe, like 5 or 6 different ways you could do it. And I feel like with those many options, it's easy to tailor which platform you should use for your project, because it gets more and more narrowed down throughout the different platforms that they offer. And then lastly, the evapotranspiration data, once it's plotted into these swath grids like I showed, it's in watts per meter squared, which is a energy unit, and it can easily be converted to millimeters per day, making it easier to compare to other versions or data sets of evapotranspiration. And so more specifically with our project of CINET, as Adriana did a really good job explaining CINET, they study all parts of the critical zone, so that's anywhere from the bedrock to the tree canopies. So there's a lot of room for really great, interesting research projects. And so like the flux tower that I mentioned in Goose Creek, I went ahead and I downloaded that Ecostress ET data because to begin with, we were going to do some comparing, but because of time and technological difficulties, we didn't quite get there. So going off of that, that leaves a lot of room for future steps and future research with this Ecostress data. On the website, they actually do have a published timeline of planned improvements in the next about 10 years. I think it went to 2028, if I remember correctly. And basing off that timeline, you know, there's so much more that you can do with this Ecostress data, and it really sets up for a good long-term project of exploring these capabilities, and more specifically for CINET, comparing data to that of a flux tower in the same area, and can we visually see differences in like the crop or vegetation type of the area, and how are they differing between the flux tower and the Ecostress? And with that, that's all I have for my presentation, just some thank yous and my references that I used throughout the summer. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, so Dr. Welp says, actually, Cindy, you can probably read the chat.
So do you know what the satellite actually measures to calculate ET flux? I am not 100% sure. That is an excellent question. Whenever I know that it only goes over during the daytime, so I would assume that it measures like vegetation, similar to how Justin was explaining this morning. So Dr. Goodwill just said surface reflections and temperature.
I think she can hear us, right?
Yes.
Cindy, can you hear us?
Yes, she can.
Okay.
So I have a question about the flex towers. So I guess there's one in this area that you were looking at. So I guess how many of those flex towers are there out there? And is the goal maybe to where, I'm sure those are primarily for research, but would the satellite then, I mean, not this, well, the Ecostress then be able to replace those towers at some point, or we wouldn't need those? We'd be able to get the information we need from the Ecostress satellite? Is that the goal?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, there's only one flux tower up here, at least that I'm aware of, in the Champaign area. And they both get the evapotranspiration data, yes, but with the Ecostress being so new and so innovative, I would say yes, that the goal is definitely to make it more accessible and as well as more accurate with it being satellite data. I did not do a whole bunch of research with the flux towers, so I'm not too aware of their capabilities, but I do know that Ecostress just came about, I believe in 2018. And with the planned improvements over the next 10 years, they have a lot more to go, and it's going to be really very innovative is what they have planned. So I could definitely foresee it being a replacement eventually.
Stress has been in the news lately because of the fires out west. I'm not exactly sure how they're using it, but I've heard them mention it on the news related to the fires.
Yeah, if anybody's interested in that, I briefly skimmed over a really interesting presentation that was published on the Ecostress website about the wildfires out west. Yeah.
I can't see the chat here in the room. Do you want to read what Dr. Goodwill said?
Yeah, so she says that flux tower networks are used as ground validation for Ecostress because Ecostress doesn't measure ET as directly as the eddy covariance measurements do.
Are there any more questions for Sydney? Wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.